Hey everybody, producer Tom Barnes here on Chicago's South Side in the Avalon Park neighborhood. This is my first time in this neighborhood, specifically in this park. It is gigantic. I can understand why they call this neighborhood Avalon Park. This park just goes on forever. There's tennis courts, there's a pool, there's ball fields, there's a track, and there's this beautiful walking path that kind of gives vibes, I'm not even kidding, kind of gives vibes to like Central Park in New York City. You can look behind me and you can see the winding path. I'm gonna flip the camera this way so you can see the winding path all the way that way. Kind of surrounds the tennis courts back that way, ball fields all around. It really is a cool spot. And my friend Paul Durica will have a little bit more information about what Avalon Park is all about. Paul?
Well, in the story of King Arthur, the Isle of Avalon is where his sword Excalibur was forged and where he was taken to recover from his wounds after his final battle with Mordred. But in Chicago, Avalon Park started out more marsh than myth. In the middle of the 19th century, the handful of German and Irish residents down there purportedly built their houses on stilts because the land was so swampy.
Really?
Now, there was an attempt to create a subdivision there in the late 1880s. There was a Milwaukee banker by the name of Jonathan Pierce who built some homes and created a little area named Pierce Park, but the name never really took. And you don't really start seeing a lot of housing being built in the area until the early 1900s, when the decision is finally made to put in some sewers and to drain the land. Prior to that, there was an area called Mud Lake, which was sort of the principal attraction of the neighborhood. A lot of people like to go there to hunt and fish. But after the land is drained, it becomes what we know today as Avalon Park, which is part of the Chicago Park District. It's a park that's almost 30 acres in size.
Oh, and does Avalon Park have the remnants of Mud Lake?
Yes, underneath where the park is today, that's where Mud Lake would have been. And the Avalon Park name eventually gets attached to the community area because of the Avalon Park Community Church, which basically encourages residents to adopt the name of the park itself to describe the area as a whole in 1910.
So fascinating to learn about such a big community area here on Chicago's South Side. I'm right off of 83rd and Woodlawn, but Paul, give me the boundaries of the entire Avalon Park stretch here.
So Avalon Park is definitely, pretty far south on the south side of Chicago. One of its major thoroughways is 79th Street, and it extends south from there into the 80s. It's a little bit north and west of the Calumet Heights neighborhood, and if you start going farther south and a little bit farther west, you'll start getting into the Pullman and Roseland area.
So the park itself obviously is beautiful. You can walk around here, but if you're driving around the Avalon Park neighborhood, what do you see, Paul?
One interesting thing that I learned in my research is in the middle of the 20th century, outside of the Hyde Park area, Avalon Park had the highest concentrations of people with doctorates in the city of Chicago. And that gives you a sense of a community that to this day remains, a middle class, educated community, living in homes that were, a lot of them were built between the 19-teens and the 1920s. And so you see the sort of styles that you would expect of that era. So bungalows, Georgians, Cape Cod houses.
Just like the sign says, I'm in the Mary Nook neighborhood in the Avalon Park community area, and the park itself kind of surrounded by this particular neighborhood. Paul, tell us about this neighborhood and why it's here.
There was an interesting development that was started in 1958 called Mary Nook, where you find houses that were significantly larger in size and more reflective of the architectural styles of the late 1950s, early 1960s. And these attracted, upper middle class residents, and even as the neighborhood began to transform demographically from being a predominantly European white neighborhood to a predominantly black neighborhood, you saw people of higher incomes and education levels moving in to these houses in Avalon Park.
Now, obviously in the summertime, this is the place to be for fun spots in the Avalon Park community area. But what other fun spots are there, Paul?
Among the landmarks that one would find in Avalon Park there's a very nice Avalon Park Public Library. There's an old theater, which was originally the Avalon Theater, today known as the Avalon Regal Theater, because it also took the name of the famous Regal Theater that was once located in Bronzeville. The Avalon Regal Theater dates back to 1927, and like the Uptown Theater and others in Chicago, is considered one of those premier picture palaces of the 1920s. After Barack Obama announced his candidacy way back in 2007, there was a party that was held there to celebrate that, but currently the Avalon Regal Theater is closed.
So as I navigate all of these community areas that make up the 77 here in Chicago, there's a lot of history, specifically labor history, that we should learn about and know about. And Paul, there's a huge connection with Avalon Park and the labor movement in Chicago. Can you explain?
So one of the residents for a time in Avalon Park, or I should say someone who had her church there, was a woman by the name of Addie Wyatt. Addie Wyatt was one of the pastors at the Vernon Park Church of God, which is located on Stony Island Avenue. She was also the first black woman to become vice president of a major union, the Amalgamated Meat Cutters Union. She was very active in the union efforts in the city of Chicago, and received the distinction of being among Time's Women of the Year in an issue in the mid-1970s, which also included Representative Barbara Jordan and tennis star Billie Jean King among the honorees.
The one thing that is really fantastic about Chicago is its history and the people from it. I mean, you see the old mixed with the new as far as the playground equipment, and of course, the Chicago Public Pool right here in the middle of the Avalon Park itself. But Paul, any famous Chicagoans from this neck of the woods?
Many of you, probably because you're Chicago history enthusiasts, are familiar with the amazing journalist and architectural historian Lee Bay. Lee Bay grew up in Avalon Park.
You know, we've talked about different neighborhoods, and a lot of neighborhoods on the north were like a lot of farmland, where it seems like on the south side of the city, not necessarily farmland because the land was swampy and they had to be drained, and then pretty much built houses on top of that, not necessarily farmland, going as far back as the beginning, as far as we know of what this area was.
I mean, that's the general pattern that you find in this kind of area of Chicago. That said, there were some farms. You know, in the 19th century, there were a lot of Dutch settlers and later Swedish settlers who moved into the area. The Dutch in particular were adept at knowing how to sort of drain land and then turn it to agricultural purposes. And that's the story that you find playing out in Roseland, which isn't too far from where Avalon Park is.
Now that we know some of the history of the Avalon Park community area neighborhood, what is it like today, Paul?
I mean, today it still remains very much a residential community with some very nice houses reflecting all different eras from the 1910s all the way up through the 1960s and even through today. I would say one of the major landmarks today is that its eastern edge is the Chicago Skyway, which opened in 1958, which of course is a major transportation hub throughout the city.
So that's like the unofficial eastern edge of Avalon Park.
That's right.
So when you're on the Skyway looking out, you're like wondering what that is. Now people
You're
know.
looking out on Avalon Park.
So as I was digging through research of the Avalon Park community area, it came up as Pennytown a couple times. Paul, you got to help me out. What's Pennytown?
So long before the area took the name of Avalon Park, and around the time when Jonathan Pierce was trying to get Pierce Park to stick, the people who were living down there actually had a different name for the area. They called it Pennytown.
Oh.
And it was named for a local resident who the historical record just refers to as Old Man Penny. But what made Old Man Penny so memorable is that he made popcorn balls and he sold them from his house and was so beloved by his neighbors that they called the neighborhood Pennytown in his honor.
All right, so from the actual park that is Avalon Park in the Avalon Park community area to a business that is doing great things in the Avalon Park neighborhood, that is Justice of the Pie and Chef Maya. Tell us all about this wonderful spot, Chef.
So I created Justice of the Pies in 2014 in memory of my late father, Steve Broussard. My dad was a criminal defense attorney who had a hobby of baking pies and quiches. He had many hobbies, but that was one of them. And when he passed away in 2009, my cousin actually had the idea that we should start a foundation teaching kids how to bake pies. And at the time, I had another business venture that I was focused on and shifted my focus to that. And then when that business ended in 2011, I began developing Justice of the Pies. And I started with the $7,000 Kickstarter campaign. I raised $7,000 on the Kickstarter campaign and operated as a satellite bakery, baking out of Westtown and on the west side from Kitchen Chicago to the Hatchery. My aunt and my great aunt taught me a lot of recipes, but then I also took initiative to look up recipes and to test them out and, you know, of course, sifted through many bad baits. But that's how you become really good at what you're doing, is when you spend more than 10,000 hours practicing your craft. And I always had a love for baking, even as a kid. Brownies, Rice Krispie treats. I would do a lemon pound cake. But for me, it was just a hobby. It was something to do on the weekend and not necessarily something that I imagined would be a career.
You know, it's funny, in reading about Justice of the Pies, I came across an article that mentioned that you might not even like pies. Is that true, Chef Maya?
Yeah, I really don't eat pies.
Okay.
And I didn't eat it growing up.
All right, so we know you do all things pie, but tell us about the rest of the menu.
I really like cakey items, which is why at Justice of the Pies, our menu consists of both sweet and savory pies as well as treats. And sometimes our treats will outsell the pie slices. We do oatmeal chocolate chip cookie. We have a lavender lemon cookie, and then a classic peanut butter cookie, which is made in the style of the lunchroom cookie, which is a Chicago staple from the Chicago public school system. We also offer soft serve. Currently, we're doing a watermelon soft serve that has lime zest and Maldon salt on top. And we also have a vanilla soft serve that allows us to do milkshakes, salted caramel milkshake, chocolate and vanilla. We keep it really simple, but we want to have a wide range of options. We do peach cobbler. We have my Aunt Ruby's pound cake, which is one of the family members that pass her recipe down to me. And then we switch out the 3-layer cake that we do. For a while, we were doing carrot cake, which is my personal favorite.
Oh, okay.
But right now, we have a dark cherry chocolate cake. And who knows what we'll have next week or next month or next season. I like to keep it interesting and fresh. And while we have a main staple menu, we also have a rotating menu where, you know, however, you know, the feeling moves me, however I'm moved by something that I've eaten or had, you know, when I travel, I'll come back and create something.
Now, obviously, Avalon Park is a great community area with lots of history, but why did you want to open up in this particular spot, Chef Maya?
The shared kitchen that I worked out of, we're on the west side of Chicago. People were always, I mean, I used to get hate mail from people saying, why are you on the west side? You should be on the south side. You're from the south side. And I'm like, not too much on me because, you know, I'm building up the business and, you know, I wanted to own the space. So it took me 8 years to, 7 years to find a building to purchase it. And I found the perfect building, which is my mom's childhood dentist office, and it's an easier commute for me because I live in you know, in a neighborhood that's not too far from here.
So deep in the restaurant community, especially here in Chicago, there's this movement about making Chicago not mean within the restaurant community area. Chef Maya, help me understand what that means.
Chicago is a culinary powerhouse compared to other cities. You know, some people, especially there's a lot of discourse on TikTok right now, people saying that Chicago is mean and, you know.
Where's that coming from? Chicago is mean?
I'll tell you exactly where it's coming from. People have seen how transplants have infiltrated New York and LA, and we don't want that to happen here.
I see,
and so it's like, you know what, come and visit. But don't come here, change the culture. Think you're going to move in and change the roots, the culture, and gentrify every single neighborhood that's available and make it impossible for the true residents that have lived here for generations to actually afford to live here. So I think that's the mindset of a lot of younger Chicagoans who have seen the effects of what has happened in New York and LA.
Sure.
But also I see a lot of young entrepreneurs who are taking ownership of the neighborhoods and are building businesses in the neighborhoods that they reside in. And so they are privately investing in their neighborhood instead of allowing gentrification to take over. And the state of Illinois is really supportive for entrepreneurs of color.
So Chef Maya, obviously a very talented and passionate person, but tell us about your food workshops.
We offered a workshop that teaches kids who reside in lower income communities that are affected by food apartheid. And the whole goal of the workshop is to help kids become self-sufficient in the kitchen. Just give them a few skills so that if their mom has to work late and they have to feed themselves and their siblings, they're able to defrost chicken and they know what to do with it. I am a child of someone who grew up in the projects and grew up with a lot of food inequities in the house because my grandparent was an alcoholic. And so what happens is that generational food trauma passed on down to me. And what essentially happened is my father would leave me at home alone as a 4th grader, and I would be hungry. And as an attorney, you go to court and then you go to the holding cell or to the correction center, and you don't know when your parent is going to be home. And so I realized as an adult that if I had just a few skills, a little bit of tools to make something for myself, I might not have resented him being gone for so long when he was working and starving.
You know, I believe everybody has a superpower of their very own, depending on what you do and who you do it for. And I believe Chef Maya has an amazing one. Take a listen.
I have a heightened sense of smell and taste, and that lends itself when I am cooking. And so that is my superpower. And I recognize that despite what may have been taken away from a person, they likely were given something else tenfold. And for me, that is my ability to be a sensitive, hyper taster, as well as being extremely sensitive to smell. And so I take that newfound power and I turn it into talent.
That is Justice of the Pie here in the Avalon Park neighborhood, and this is for love of Chicago. Thomas.barnas@cbs.com. If you have a neighborhood that you would like me to check out, hit me up there and I'll see you then.